Hey everybody, I'm Joe. We're talking about the Marvel Multiverse game today, and we are doing another character build. Here we go. I'm going to start with a somewhat controversial statement, and that is that the Marvel Multiverse game, as currently designed, does not have the ability to build an actual tank character. But let's talk about what I mean by that. What is a tank? And more importantly, what is the difference between a tank and a battlefield controller? The two actually have more in common mechanically than at first you might think. We imagine a tank as a big, beefy melee character that soaks a bunch of damage, and we think of a battlefield controller as a small, meek character working at range with certain abilities depending on the game system that you are in. But mechanically, they actually have a lot in common. The goal of either the tank or the battlefield controller is to reduce the effectiveness of enemy action economy. Here's what I mean by this. Why is it that a tank is considered to be a character that has a whole lot of hit points? Well, the reason is if enemies direct their attacks at a character with a whole lot of hit points, then those attacks are not going to end up killing the character. They're not going to end up being effective. In other words, that action economy, directing attacks at the tank character, is effectively wasted because it did not achieve the goal, which is to win the combat encounter. So a tank is a character that directs enemy combatants to attack them, not their allies. And that is entirely done because the tank can soak that action economy more easily than the allies can. If you think about it, this means that a tank could also be a character with incredibly high defense scores who directs enemy attacks at them and those attacks miss. The reason a tank has lots of hit points is so that they can soak the action economy. A battlefield controller actually does a very similar thing. They want to waste enemy action economy, but their abilities simply cripple the action economy of the enemy, making it so that they can't move, or they can't attack, or their attacks are less effective, or they move less, or they lose their reaction, or any combination of battlefield control abilities. What they have in common is the reduction of the effectiveness of enemy action economy. So when you think about it, a tank is a very specific type of battlefield controller, one that directs action economy where it is going to be least impactful, namely at themselves. A battlefield controller simply cripples that action economy. But either way, this is a defensive play style that makes it impossible to compete against our heroes and their team. But what makes a tank character? Well, a tank character cannot just be one with high hit points. Any character in Marvel Multiverse can choose to max out his or her resilience score, thereby maxing out hit points. So it is merely a character building choice whether or not to max out your hit points, but you can be melee with max hit points, you can work at range with max hit points, you can be a damage dealer or a utility character, and any of these has the ability to have the same hit points, unlike in other game systems. No, what really differentiates a tank character is abilities that force the enemies to direct their action economy against the tank. And those abilities, very specifically, are not in Marvel Multiverse. This is a missing part of the game. I'll just say that this is a gap in the play design. There are not abilities that give trouble to enemies if they attack somebody other than the tank. There are not abilities that tanks get that would then allow for an edge on an attack against the tank. In other words, there's no way a tank character has, mechanically speaking, to force enemies to attack him. This is why tank characters tend to be melee characters. By physically getting up in the face of the enemy, we're essentially telling them, you have to attack me or you will die soon. And that is a play style. I want actual abilities and powers in the game that force enemies to attack the tank. And as of right now, that doesn't exist. But does this mean that we cannot build a tank in Marvel Multiverse? And I would say we absolutely can. But a tank in Marvel Multiverse is going to look different than a tank in other game systems. And that's because we cannot force enemies to attack us. So instead, we have to create a hybrid of the traditional tank and the traditional battlefield controller. In other words, as I build characters in this game, until new powers and power sets are released, battlefield controllers and tanks are going to be one and the same. For us, a battlefield controller needs to be able to absorb a lot of incoming attacks and needs to be able to cripple the enemies on the battlefield. In other words, they need to be able to reduce the action economy of the enemies and hopefully, through playstyle decisions, direct attacks at the tank. So we have to ask ourselves the question, how do we measure the effectiveness of a battlefield controller? Many people have tried to measure the effectiveness of a tank or a battlefield controller, and my solution is essentially to create a point value system for action economy. The action economy that enemies have is movement, action, and reaction in Marvel Multiverse. Remember, there's no bonus actions or 3-action economy like there is in Pathfinder or D&D or other systems. There is action, there is movement, and there is reaction. And how many reactions do enemies get? We're going to assume they only have one because that's the way most enemy stat blocks work. If we were to say that each action economy was 1 point of value, then we could ask ourselves the question, how many points of action economy can a particular character remove from the board? We're also going to measure one additional thing. I'm going to measure the average defense score for the character, because remember, the reason a tank has lots of hit points is so that they can soak damage, but really high defense scores would also be a really effective way of making action economy ineffective. Today we're going to be building a tank who is a battlefield controller, because that's the way we have to build them in this game, and base it off of the Spider Powers Power set. I'm not very good at naming my characters, as you know, so if you have a name, I'd love to hear it in the comments below, but I'll be calling this character the Spider Tank. Let's go ahead and do our point buy for rank 1. We're going to take a -4 in melee, and I want to explore that in just a minute, but then we're going to get 4 to our agility, 3 to our resilience, 1 to our vigilance, and 1 to our ego. I really want a lot of hit points on this character because they are supposed to have attacks drawn towards them, and so I need to be able to absorb that. We're also going to operate at distance, making it hopefully difficult for our enemies to attack us, but what kind of a tank doesn't have reasonable hit points? At the end of the day, with some powers included, we're going to have defenses of 14 for melee and agility, 13 for resilience, 11 for vigilance and ego, and a 10 for logic. So why did I decide to dump melee? The Spider Powers Power set, as we have discussed, does have a little bit of a servant of two masters about it. We have the ranged webbing ability, where you use your webs using your agility stat and agility attacks, but it assumes that any damaging attacks are going to be done using melee, because webbing does not cause damage. Meaning that if you build your character the way that the Spider Powers Power set assumes you are going to, then the reality of the situation is you're going to be putting all of your stats into your physical traits, and you're going to have less for your hit points and less for your mental stats. I think that that is just not a great way of utilizing the power set as presented. If we were to ignore any up-close attacking potential of the character, we could dump the melee and have the points for everything else we care about. And since we are using our ranged capacity to lock down the battlefield and then stay at a distance, we don't need melee for anything, really. And so we're going to dump it. This also means that the concept behind the sniper, which I did a little bit ago, really works because when you use ranged weapons, you want to operate at range, and so ranged weapons actually interact with spider powers really well. Let's take a look at occupation. Remember, the goal of this character is to protect allies. I'm not ranking this character for damage. I'm not even going to calculate it. I'm going to calculate how well they can guard people. And thinking about a great tank character, what kind of an occupation should they have? I think that if we want to lean into the idea of being somebody who protects allies, taking the healthcare worker occupation would make a lot of sense. It also gives us two traits, clinician and first aid. Clinician gives us an edge on logic checks to determine what is medically wrong with someone. I talked about this in my ranking the traits videos, but I don't think this is really all that useful because knowing what's wrong with someone is not the same as actually treating them, but it might come up from time to time. And since we're not bumping our actual logic on this character, we'll take all the help we can get. The other trait is first aid. We have an edge on logic checks, which will help us stop the bleeding condition. This might come up. What should our origin be? You could take this in any way that you want, but I think it really might be fun for this character to find out that they actually have some sort of an important origin that is actually all about helping and assisting people. So I think I'm going to go with Mythic Asgardian. Mythic Asgardian gives us two traits, God Heritage and Enhanced Physique. Enhanced Physique treats us as one size larger than we are for the purposes of picking up, carrying, or throwing things. Since we're dumping our melee stat, this really might never come up, but it's possible, so it gives you something. God Heritage might be the most difficult to use trait in the game. We find out that we are the god of something. I don't know, something. You have to work this out with your narrator, and then you have an edge on all checks having to do with the thing you are the god of. How much you can get away with this trait entirely depends on campaign setting and the narrator. So I think it's very difficult to use, but if you could find some way to make defending an ally part of what you are the god of, or serving people or healing people in some way, then this would tie into the character concept. There's something there to work with your narrator. We are going into the Spider Powers power set, of course, for this character, but our first power is going to be Evasion. Evasion allows us to use our agility defense for melee defense, which is why our melee defense is reasonable, actually really good right now. And then we're going to take web casting. Now, I talked about this briefly in my sniper build, but here it's actually going to be relevant. And I believe web casting might honestly have some errors in the way that it is written, which we're going to talk about as we go along. So web casting has some very strange interactions that we're going to examine, but I want to make sure you understand the way it's presented in the core rulebook. It does not cost focus, though it does cost an action to use. Its range is 10 spaces, and there are no prerequisites because it is a prerequisite for other stuff. We make a ranged attack against an enemy's agility defense. Upon a success, we paralyze the enemy. Upon a fantastic success, they are also pinned. Breaking free of the webbing is a melee check of 20. So this is a regular success for a paralysis condition, which is really interesting. The paralysis condition, by my reading of the web casting power, persists until they break free of the webbing. So let's take a look at what paralysis is. The paralyzed condition says that the enemy cannot move and cannot take actions that require a melee or agility check. Their agility defense is reduced to 10 against ranged attacks, and close attacks automatically hit them. Upon a fantastic success, we would pin the enemy, but pinning imposes the grabbed condition, but also the pinned character has trouble on melee or agility checks and cannot use movement actions. If that sounds to you like being paralyzed is worse than being pinned, you're right. we get the better effect on a regular success. And that's very strange. Now, to really understand pinned, we have to understand the grabbed condition. So let's take a second and look at that. A grabbed character cannot move unless they can pick up and carry the character who is grabbing them. Since the webbing is actually grabbing our target, that is not feasible. There are additional mechanics in grabbing that have to do with your defense scores if another character is grabbing you, but we can ignore all of those for our purposes. Now, since web casting as a power specifically says that breaking free of the webbing requires a melee check with a target number of 20, the paralysis condition imposed by web casting must still allow the check to break out of the webbing. Otherwise, that last bit of phrasing in the power is non-functional. So a character that is paralyzed by webbing has no movement and has no ability to do agility-based or melee checks except for the melee check to break free of the webs themselves. They can still do any checks that are mental. So if they have ego attacks or they have logic attacks, they can still do those. By my reading, the only benefit you get to having a fantastic success is that the pinned condition imposes trouble on any melee or agility check, which would include the check to break free of the webs themselves. The paralyzed condition does not specifically have this language. So, by my reading, if you paralyze somebody, the only type of physical check they can do is the melee check to break out of the webbing. They cannot move until they do so, but they can still use mental attacks. Now, you might think, wait a minute, it said that paralysis does not allow for melee or agility checks, but wouldn't they still be able to make attacks? And the answer is no. I'm going to read you something from the description of the melee ability score to understand what it means to make an attack. Melee measures a character's brawling ability in close combat, etc., etc. It's an important score for characters who like to fight with their fists. Melee effects, melee action checks for things like punching or throwing, and melee defense, etc., etc. So, the attack made using melee, and by extension the attack made using agility, is a type of a check. In other words, an attack is a type of check, not a different type of action economy. Therefore, if paralysis does not allow for melee or agility checks, it does not allow for the attacks that are made with those checks. Webcasting is amazing. Upon a regular success, we can cripple enemies. They cannot use reactions that allow them to attack unless it's a mental attack. They cannot attack using their physical traits. They can only use a melee check to break out, and they cannot move. They can still attack with mental attacks if that is a capacity that they have. The paralysis is improved by a fantastic success when that gives trouble on the check to break out of the webbing. The next power we're going to take is wall crawling. Wall crawling gives us the ability to climb at a climb speed equal to our running speed, and that's going to allow us move away from the enemies so that we can cripple them without being in reach of their ability to attack us. The next power we're going to take is Spider Sense. We get an edge on initiative checks and on vigilance checks to perceive danger. Enemies have trouble on agility checks against our vigilance defense, and we gain a permanent +2 to our agility defense, which will then improve our melee defense as well. The trait we're going to take is Situational Awareness, which is going to give us yet another edge on initiative checks. So the reason that we're bumping our initiative so much at the beginning of this character is that a battlefield controller that cripples the battlefield before the combat even really begins is going to just do a better job. And this is going to be benefited not only from just a high roll, but from the possibility of having a fantastic success. Please remember that if you have a fantastic success on an initiative check, you go during a bonus round. So ideally, we'll have a bonus round and then we'll go first in the regular initiative tracker, giving us 2 turns to cripple the battlefield. So how are we going to measure the effectiveness of this character? We are going to assign a point value to all action economy. action, movement, and reaction is going to each have 1 point, or action economy point. So the question is, in a round of combat, how many action economy points can we, in an ideal world, take away from our enemies? Since a tank also wants to absorb incoming attacks, I'm going to look at our average defense score across all our defenses as well. A round of combat for us is just webcasting against somebody, which will remove 3 action economy points, action, movement, and reaction, and our defense score is going to be an average of 12.8, so we're going to round that to a 13. It's rank 2, so let's do point buy. We're going to bring agility and resilience to a 5. We're going to bring vigilance to a 2 and ego to a 2. This is going to give us melee and agility defenses of 17. We're going to get a resilience defense of 15, vigilance and ego of a 12, and logic is going to be a 10. If you want to defend your allies, at some point you've got to go into the shield bearer power set. So we have not had a weapon so far, but now we're going to at least pick up a shield. But first we're going to take web slinging, which is going to give us a swing line speed equal to 3 times our regular running speed. So now we can crawl and we can swing on webs. I would like to, at this point, tell you a power that if you are building this character, do not take, and that is web grabbing. I said before that I believe there are typos or mistakes inside of the web casting power, and you can tell that from the fact that paralysis is a more crippling effect than being pinned, and you can tell that from the design of web grabbing. Web grabbing is a rank 2 power and requires web casting as a prerequisite, meaning anyone who takes this already has web casting. The range is 10 spaces and it does cost 5 points of focus. We make a ranged attack against an enemy. Upon a success, they are grabbed, and upon a fantastic success, they are pinned. Grabbed is just straight up not as crippling of an effect as being paralyzed. And not only that, this costs focus where web casting does not. I see no reason for a character to take web grabbing. Not ever, because the web grab condition, being grabbed, doesn't interact with any other power that says you must have a character grabbed to utilize the power. As a result, this is just a more expensive version of web casting, and I would avoid it. But we will be taking web trapping. This costs 10 points of focus. It lasts for 15 minutes times our rank, so right now that's half an hour, and this is our first area of effect, webs. We can fill 5 spaces with webbing, and since it's the full space, I imagine this moves vertically to some height, though it doesn't say how high. This space is difficult terrain for anything that moves through it. Any creature that starts its turn or moves into the affected space must make an agility check with a target number of 20 or be paralyzed by the webbing. There's that paralysis again, which is the much better condition for us. And again, breaking free of the webbing requires a melee check, target number 20. Now the one thing to keep in mind with web trapping is that you have to be rank 3 in order to take it, and we're only rank 2. We are going to get around that in our traits section in just a minute. But first we need some shield powers, and we're going to take shield 1, which gives us 1 damage reduction, which is awesome. But then we're going to take hurled shield block. Hurled shield block is a reaction power that costs 5 points of focus, and we do have to have shield 1 in order to take it. This is triggered when an enemy makes an attack against an ally's agility defense, and we get to throw our shield and add damage reduction equal to our shield power. The shield then bounces back to us. So now we have a use for our reaction, which is going to be awesome. The trait we're going to take is going to be surprising power in order to grab web trapping. Remember, surprising power allows you to bypass rank and origin requirements for a particular power. We are already in the power set for web trapping, and we have the prerequisite. The only thing we are missing is the rank requirement. Surprising power allows us to grab this 1 level early, which is great. During a round of combat, we're going to do web trapping. Ideally, this will be able to ensnare 3 enemies, taking away their action economy for movement, action, and reaction, and then we have 1 reaction to use hurled shield block. If all of that goes off, we're going to remove 10 action economy points from the board, and we're going to have an average defense score of 13.5. Let's do point buy for rank 3. We're going to bring our agility and our resilience to a 6. We're going to bring vigilance to a 4, ego to a 3. This is going to give us defenses of melee and agility for 18. Resilience is going to be a 16. Vigilance is going to be 14, and ego is going to be 13. Logic's going to be a 10. The first two powers we're going to take are shield 2 and 3, which gives us now a 3 damage reduction for ourselves, and more importantly, 3 damage reduction when we use hurled shield block to defend an ally. Next, we're going to take Do This All Day. Do This All Day is in the Shield Bearer power set, not just martial arts. And so this is a great way of picking it up, and I can't imagine a tank character who doesn't take this power. Do This All Day allows you to use your action in order to heal your health by expending focus at a 2-for-1 discount. The next power we're going to take is Shield Deflection. This allows us to use our reaction when we are targeted with an attack against our agility, and then we can impose trouble on the attack. We're also benefited in our agility defense, as you know, and so it's very difficult if we have our reaction available to us to hit us using an agility attack. But shield deflection is really just there because it is a prerequisite for hurled shield deflection. This costs 5 points of focus and is a reaction to use, and we can use it when an ally is targeted with an attack that is against their agility defense. When we use our reaction in this way, the attack has trouble. And now you have a difficult choice to make. Hurled shield block does not make the attack hit less often, but does make the attack do less damage. Hurled shield deflection is going to make it so that the attack has trouble, is less likely to hit, but is not going to allow the attack to do less damage. You now have a choice on which one you want to use depending on the circumstance. We're going to take combat reflexes. If you didn't see this coming, you haven't seen my other videos. This is going to give you an additional reaction. So now we can use 2 reactions to defend our allies. Our round of combat is the same as before. Web trapping is going to allow us to lock down an area and hopefully ensnare 3 enemies. And now we have 2 reactions for hurled shield block, and that's going to take away 11 points of action economy from our enemies. And we're going to have an average defense score of 14.8 while doing so, which we're going to round to a 15. Let's do point buy for rank 4. We're going to bring agility, resilience to a 7. We're going to bring vigilance to a 6, ego to a 4. We're now going to have defenses for melee and agility of a 19. Resilience is going to be a 17, vigilance a 16, ego is going to be a 14, and logic's going to be a 10. It's rank 4, and I want lots of actions and reactions. Can you guess where I'm going? I bet you can. We're going into the super speed power set. I promise I won't do this for every build, but there's a couple that I really wanted to utilize it for that happen to be kind of right in a row. Super speed is going to allow us to get the lightning actions power, which I believe is the most overpowered thing in the game, but let's go over how it works so that you understand it. Lightning actions is going to allow us to have an additional full action and full reaction every round of combat, and when we roll initiative, we can automatically make it a fantastic success. Remember, if you have a fantastic success in initiative, you get to go in a bonus round. So now we are going to have a double edge on an initiative check that we're rolling pretty high for, and it's automatically a fantastic success. You are likely to have 2 rounds of combat in a row before the enemies get a turn. The next power we're going to take is Speed Run 1. This takes our normal running speed and multiplies it by our rank, which right now is 4. Please remember that our ability to climb up walls and swing on lines is all related to our running speed. So all of those movement speeds now go up. Next, we're going to take Shield 4. This is 4 damage reduction for us and 4 damage reduction anytime we use Hurled Shield Block. I am likely to use Hurled Shield Block instead of Hurled Shield Deflection most of the time. Next, we're going to take Brace for Impact. It's another reaction power, but it might save your life. This allows you to utilize your reaction when you are hit with an attack to have the damage go to your focus rather than your health. Absolutely important for a tank, and it very well might save your life. One thing that pairs beautifully with Brace for Impact is more focus. So the trait we're going to take is Battle Ready, which gives us an additional 30 points of focus. I love it. So what does combat look like for us now? Well, now we can do web trapping twice, which is going to give 2 areas of effect, hopefully each ensnaring 3 enemies. And we have 3 reactions, one from lightning actions and one from combat reflexes, that will allow us to use hurled shield block. If all of that goes off, we are going to remove 21 points of action economy from our enemies. Oh, and while doing so, we will have an average defense score of 15.8, so we're going to round that to a 16. Let's go ahead and do point buy for rank 5. We're going to bring agility and resilience to an 8, vigilance to a 6, ego to a 7. We will have defenses of 20 for melee and agility, 18 for resilience, 16 for our vigilance, and 17 for ego and logic. We finally are going to get there with the power. And what is that power? Obviously, we are taking wisdom on this character. This lets us use our ego defense against logic attacks. If you felt that this logic defense was absolutely crippling you, you could take this earlier in the character's career, and I certainly wouldn't blame you. If you wanted to lean into those really high defenses, this is great. I just leaned into high hit points, but I would understand either way. By rank 5, we get both. We're going to take jump 1. Jump 1 says that we now have a jumping speed that is equal to our running speed. And this can be in any direction, vertically or horizontally. Our running speed is impacted by speed run 1, and speed run 1 says that our running speed is now 150 feet during combat, which means you can now jump straight up in the air 150 feet. But we're also going to take speed run 2, which says that out of combat, our running speed is 50 times what it previously was. So now you are able to run outside of combat 7,500 feet. This new out of combat speed does not interact with your jump speed or your swing line speed or your wall crawling speed. Those are still related to your in combat speed, but it still gives you incredible mobility. Next, we're going to take Blur, which allows us to use an action or a reaction and 5 points of focus to impose trouble on all incoming attacks for 1 round. You may never use it, but it can save your life. Next, we're going to take Catch Bullets. This absolutely might never come up, and most of the time, Hurled Shield Block is probably superior, but it's just another way of defending allies. Anyway, this is a reaction that costs 10 points of focus, and it is triggered when a ranged attack using some kind of a projectile is made against us or an ally within our reach. And if you looked at that and said, man, it'd be cool to combine Catch Bullets with the plasticity power set that extends your reach, I agree, but we're not doing that on this build. I'll put that in the someday category. Anyway, we make an agility check and we try to beat the attack against our ally. If we succeed, we completely nullify the attack and catch the bullet right out of the air. Upon a fantastic success, we get our reaction back. And so it might be worth using when an attack is within your reach in order to hopefully get that fantastic success and simply get the reaction back. I'm not calculating that when I look at combat at the end of every rank, but it could happen. The reason I'm not calculating for it is that we are attempting to work at range with our spider powers, so the likelihood of being within 5 feet of an ally is actually pretty slim. But that's not going to stop us from taking signature attack for Catch Bullets as our trait at this rank. You'll notice that web trapping doesn't require us to roll. It requires the enemy to roll in order to get out. And so as a result, I have not had to use signature attack on this build. I've never needed it. We could have taken it for web casting, and if you did that, I certainly wouldn't blame you, but we're using web trapping almost all the time. But here we do make a roll with Catch Bullets, and so having an edge on that check is actually going to help us get that fantastic success, which would give us our reaction back. And so I think it is worthwhile to take signature attack on this particular power at this rank. At any rate, during combat, we're doing 2 web trappings, 3 reactions, probably for Hurled Shield Block or maybe Catch Bullets. We're not assuming the fantastic success on Catch Bullets, and that will still give us 21 points of action economy removed from the board. But now that we have the wisdom power, our average defense score has gone up to an 18. Let's go ahead and do rank 6. We're going to bring agility and resilience to a 9, vigilance and ego to an 8. This is going to give us defenses of 21 for melee and agility, 19 for resilience, and 18s for everything else. There's a lot you could do at this rank, and there's nothing that I think is necessary. You could, if you wanted to, take no powers and just take 5 extra points to your ability scores, giving yourself monstrous defenses. And I think that would be appropriate. I really, really do. We're going to take some powers just to see what kind of fun they might be, but if you didn't do any, or if you went into a new power set, I think the world's your oyster at rank 6. But we're going to take jump 2, mostly just for the funsies of it. Jump 2 says that we now have a jump speed that's equal to our run speed times our rank. But please remember that our run speed in combat is already our normal run speed times our rank. So our run speed is 180, which means our jump is now 1,080 feet. You can jump straight in the air 1,000 feet if you really want to, or over a lake, or you can start jumping over really small hills. It gets stupid at this point. But that wasn't ridiculous enough, so let's make it ridiculouser and take jump 3. Jump 3 says that you have a jump speed that is 50 times what it normally is if you are outside of combat. This means your jump speed outside of combat is now 54,000 feet. So yes, you can jump 54,000 feet straight into the air, rules as written, which that's crazy. I don't know what you're going to use this for, but please use it. And please tell me in the comments what you would use a 54,000 foot jump speed for, because my God, is that funny. While we're at it, let's go ahead and take Run on Water. This is now a permanent ability, and you can run on water, and you cannot sink so long as you keep moving. And let's go ahead and take Immovable. For every point of melee defense the character has, we can reduce knockback by 1 space. I'd like to point out that we now have a melee defense of 21, and so we can reduce knockback by over 100 feet if that ever comes up. While we're at it, let's go ahead and take Flight 1. Flight 1 says that we now have a flying speed equal to our running speed times our rank. This is the same as our jump 2 ability, which means we can now fly 1,080 feet per round of combat. What's a trait we could take here? Well, I'm going to recommend Quick Learner. Why not? It seems like a lot of fun. This means that if we fail an action check, we now have an edge when we try it again. This might come up. Or of course, you could take anything that feels even thematic and appropriate to you in your campaign. I have no really solid recommendations. Combat is the same as it has been: 2 web trappings, 3 reactions, which ideally will remove 21 points of action economy from our enemies, and we're going to have an average defense score of 19.1, which will just round to a 19 while we're doing it. So let's take a look at some final thoughts. This is a great playstyle. Defending allies just seems like an insanely fun thing to do, and the amount of frustration your enemies will feel when you lock down the battlefield and destroy their ability to effectively operate in combat is so much fun. And you're going to get to do all kinds of movements and all kinds of crazy movement speeds while you're at it. I have felt for a long time that characters that are damage oriented should have more of a power restriction than support characters. This is why I feel that clerics in your fantasy games should be some of the most powerful characters, because when you are taking a play style where you defend your allies and support your allies and your teammates, you should get really cool stuff. The characters that do the direct damage are already taking a lot of the glory, and I've always felt that they should have a little bit less of the power and power creep in the game. So the fact that this character is locking down battlefields, jumping thousands of feet in the air, crawling up walls at ridiculous speeds, and by the end flying at ridiculous speeds, this doesn't bother me. I love the idea of the character that doesn't do damage, but is godlike in every other ability. So yeah, I think this is a great way of playing a tank, and I think as soon as you remove the necessity of doing damage or working in melee from this spider character, the power set comes alive. That's what I've got for you today. YouTube's made out of buttons. Press some of them, and I'll see you next time. Thanks so much.